Minister in charge of the Australian Tax Office is the Assistant Treasurer, Michael Sukkar, and he joins us this morning. Good morning to you. Thank you for being with us, Minister. Look, we get that things had to happen lightning fast, and that was terrific. But how do you even begin to explain what is being described as Australia's biggest budget blunder?
Well, Monique and Matt, there was two real points here to make. The first is, at the time that the JobKeeper scheme was put together, as you've rightly pointed out, in pretty unprecedented circumstances and in record time, obviously the health outcomes and the peak of coronavirus was looking much worse. The restrictions potentially were looking much worse, and the $130 billion estimate that was made at that time was in the context of much worse health outcomes. Now, obviously, a credit to the National Cabinet, the Prime Minister and the Premiers has meant the health outcomes have been much better than we expected, and therefore, of course, the economic outcomes have been better. So that accounts for one aspect. On the second point, yes, there was about 500 to 1,000 businesses who misreported the number of employees. About a million businesses have registered for JobKeeper. In the process of reconciling payments to the amount of employees that were enrolled, it became clear that there was a number of mistakes made on forms. The minute that was identified, it's been communicated. So the reality is the $130 billion was an estimate from Treasury. It's not an objective, it's not a target. This is a demand-driven scheme. The parameters of the scheme are there. If a business qualifies, i.e. for a small and medium business, it's had a turnover reduction of at least 30%, or for a very large business, a turnover reduction of 50%, their employees are eligible. Importantly, there are going to be, we expect, about 3.5 million employees who benefit from this scheme, about 800,000 businesses who benefit. So it's, by any measure, an extraordinarily large scheme, whichever way you look at it.
Assistant Treasurer, it is also by any measure an extraordinarily large blunder, and I accept that given the magnitude of the government's COVID-19 response, errors are going to be made. Let's accept that. But let's look at this. Just last week, in an interview with the ABC, you said it would be a very different conversation if you said to me, there's only 3 million people who are covered. It's half of what we expected. The government's been standing up saying there are 6.5 million Australians receiving this response. What I am struggling, and I think a lot of Australians are struggling to comprehend, is what the flow-on effects are for the government's whole response to COVID-19 when you thought an extra $60-odd billion was being pumped into the economy. Well,
in the end, what it means is our country is less indebted than it otherwise would be. This is all borrowed money. There's not a pot of money that we have sitting aside waiting to be spent on programs like this. The reality is, of where we are at the moment, that's $60 billion less that needs to be borrowed. And I think, again, this is a point that's really important to be made. When these estimates were put in place, and I reiterate they were estimates, it's not an objective or not a target that we're seeking to reach, the health outcomes were looking like they were going to be much worse. Restrictions much harder and for longer. And so the economic outcome has been commensurately better.
But Assistant Treasurer, I am sorry to jump in on you here, but can I just ask one point of clarity? This was a clerical error. If, for example, there was something on the form saying every employee must supply their tax file number, this would never have happened.
Yeah, look, there's no doubt there's been a real big error here. I don't want to ascribe blame to Treasury or the ATO, because the reality is they have been working at absolute maximum capacity, whether it's administering this scheme or the many other schemes in place, JobSeeker, cash flow boost for business, early release of superannuation. But here, clearly, there was 500 to 1,000 forms that were put in with a disproportionately large number of employees that were registered. Now, it has been picked up. Admittedly, it's been picked up through the process of reconciling the program. Would I have liked it to have been picked up earlier? Of course. And then that way we would have been providing accurate numbers as we were receiving them. But in the end, the error's been made. The error in the first instance was made by applicants to the program. We don't blame them for that. Would we have liked to have picked it up earlier? Or for the ATO to have done it,
Yeah.
of course.
So let's just forget the blame game for a second. The money is there. We know that the money is there. How about expanding the JobKeeper scheme now, or extending the JobSeeker? We know that there are a lot of people out there. There are foreign workers. There are people in the arts, university staff who are desperate for some help. Will you extend the scheme?
Well, Monique, again, I make the point that the money, as I said, is borrowed money. So it's not a pot of money sitting there just waiting to be spent and waiting for the government to decide how to spend it. The parameters of the scheme are broad. There are going to be 3.5 million employees that access this scheme. Importantly, the comprehensive response we've put in place, whether it's JobKeeper or for those people who can't access JobSeeker because they're unemployed or otherwise don't qualify, they're entitled to JobSeeker, which with the coronavirus supplement means they will receive payments of around $1,100 a fortnight. So one way or the other, every Australian through this package and through our very important social safety net is being supported. JobKeeper is not the only story, important though it is.
Assistant Treasurer Michael Sukkar, we do appreciate you talking to us this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Monique. Thanks, Matt.